Sergio, the new president. I've been in office for the past year, so if you've been to meetings before, you'll recognize me. And I'll go ahead and introduce the new officers. So we have Alex over here.
Yeah, I'm a new officer, and I'll be doing some tutorials sometime next year, maybe one this next couple of weeks.
Next week. And we have Max.
Yes, I'm officer 2. Look out for me next year. We're planning a multi-part Go tutorial, so gotta check that out.
And then we have Vice President Bradley.
I'm Bradley, Vice President. I'm going to be doing the Chrome extension tutorial today, so hopefully you guys have fun with that.
Yes, and go ahead and please sign in at both of those links. We have like some limited Google Swag, like some backpacks and water bottles and stuff that we're going to raffle off just because there's so few of them, and we'll take that from people who signed in. And so yeah, I guess we'll hop right in and start with the tutorial. And we'll give out, well, I'll let you guys pick from this table after the tutorial's finished.
Oh, we'll do it later.
Here, go back to the first slide.
Go back to what?
The first slide.
Oh, and Sergio. To get the screen recording, I just have to click the screen. I don't have to like drag it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lord Jerry, we should have got more of it. Just carry it. Okay. Either now or never do it.
Alright, so has anybody not signed in yet?
To both links.
Yeah, to both links? Alright, we'll wait for you then.
Yes. Everyone stare at them while they go. I missed who it was though, so I can't join in.
It was him.
Oh, you made music.
Yeah, we do.
Alright, is everyone ready?
Yes.
Alright, so I guess the first thing you guys should do is make a new directory to put this extension in. So I already did that, but does anybody not know how to create a new directory?
How can I do it from the terminal?
Okay, so so I already made one, but I'll make a new one just to demonstrate how to do it. So if I want to make a new directory, mkdir and then the name of the directory. So I'll call it Chrome tutorial because I already made one called Chrome extension tutorial.
They could do this with the file browser too.
Yeah, you can do it with the file browser too. But and once you create that, you want to go into it. So cd Chrome tutorial.
I'm on Windows.
PowerShell, bro.
You can these commands still work on Windows, right?
Yes.
Okay.
CD should work.
All right. So
CD works.
So we don't have any, I guess, template or anything. The only thing you're going to need to download is this image asset, and that's going to be the icon for the extension. So go ahead and go to this link here and download it and place that image in your folder. So I will do that as well. All right, I guess I can't do that.
I think from your end you can just like click it. I think it's a hyperlink.
Not quite. Okay.
Can't select it?
Huh?
Can't highlight it?
No. I don't want to. I want to leave it up so you guys can still see it. Can you guys still see that? Would you guys prefer if we turn one of the lights off? Is it okay? Can you guys see that okay? Huh?
Move. From the terminal.
No, you can do it with Finder. That's fine.
There's limits to your hacker skills.
Yeah.
I can make it.
I think you gotta drag it through the folder.
It should work. There you go.
All right, there we go. All right, so does everybody have that? All right, cool. So I guess before I just jump straight into the code, I want to explain a little bit about how if you wanted to do something like this on your own, you would figure out how to do that, because I don't want to just sit here and tell you type this, now type this. You know, I want to give you some context behind it. So if you look up how to make a Chrome extension. One of the first links is going to be Google's developer site, getting started building a Chrome extension. So this is right here. It says one of the first things we'll need is a manifest file. So what a manifest file is, if you guys have been to the Android tutorial or have done Android before, I'm sure you see the what is it, Android manifest, I think .xml or something. Well, it's basically just a file where you declare things that are needed to know how to configure stuff and run stuff.
Yeah, so it's the name of the program and permissions.
Yeah, it's basically just permissions, the name, any resources you want to use, stuff like that. So it's pretty simple. It's really just like key value storage, like the name of the thing and then the value for what it gets. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is create a manifest file so that Chrome knows what our app is and what it needs to use it. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm just going to call this manifest.js. So this is in a JSON format, if you're familiar with that. If you're not familiar with that, that's totally fine. It's basically just what I described. It's like a JavaScript object without having to name an object, kind of. So the first thing we'll do is manifest version. And I'll put 2. I guess that's the version that Chrome currently wants you to use. So we'll do that.
I must have missed something because I have no idea what this program is. Like the one that everybody seems to be.
Yeah, I guess
Just
like
text editor.
Oh, okay. Just
This is
any text.
Yeah, you could use any text editor.
Okay, I got you.
Can you use it?
so like if you've never really like programmed like just from a text editor, it's like he's using Atom. You can also use Sublime Text, which is like a really popular text editor. Is anyone not familiar with either of those? What have you used before?
Just Eclipse.
Just Eclipse, yeah.
Eclipse is fine too.
Yeah, Eclipse will work for this.
Does that work?
Yeah, but I'd recommend downloading Atom. It's completely free. Yeah, atom.io, I think is the site.
I think so. Or just Google Atom text editor.
A lot of stuff built in. It's made by GitHub, actually.
Basically, like if you've never used a text editor before and you've only used IDEs like Eclipse or Visual Studio or Xcode or something, an IDE like Eclipse is like full-fledged and it allows you to like run and build your app through the IDE. There's always like that run button, right? And it has like a debugger and everything. A text editor like Atom or Sublime is literally just text files, and all we have is a folder there with 2 files in it. And like IDEs will have like other like configuration files and stuff like that, but our text editor is like very bare bones. All it has is just plain text files, and you can save them with the appropriate extension of the file type. Like this is a JS file, a JavaScript file. So essentially all it is just a folder of files, and then our text editor. I mean, we could even use Notepad, but that won't have any syntax highlighting.
Yeah, so basically like this is like it's a very small application, and we don't need to compile it or anything like that. So if you were doing like a large like Java application or something like that, you would want to use an IDE so you can build it and run it and stuff. But all we really need to do is write text. So for those purposes, a text editor will be fine, and it's probably even better to use.
Does anyone like want us to like wait and like let you download a text editor? 'Cause that's totally cool. If you don't have like Sublime or Atom.
Yeah, we can wait.
Pretty hefty.
What would be like the fastest way do you guys think to like get that?
Atom.io.
Yeah, just downloading it from there.
If you haven't already, I highly recommend, whether you're using Sublime or Atom, to open the folder, not an individual file, and you get that nice view on the left. I think Atom might do it automatically sometimes.
Atom does. Sublime, I don't think it
Sublime
does.
does not do it unless you specifically open the folder. What?
Sublime doesn't do
You can do it. I think it's a separate option in the file menu.
I think it might be
Like file open folder instead. Yeah, it's not entirely obvious, but definitely assists things. And he said, just while we're waiting for a download, the text editors can be very bare bones. I like them. They're lightweight. Don't need to be configured. You know.
But you can configure them if you want to.
My fan starts going crazy. But even so, Atom has a lot of free extensions. I know Sublime does too, but in Atom, the package manager is built in. So, for example, if you want like, there's an extension, I forgot what it's called, but yeah, so you can just go preferences, install There's one that will actually verify your JavaScript syntax is correct, and it'll like highlight it red, for example. I forgot what it's called. There's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, like for like if you're using like an IDE like Eclipse, it'll tell you if you have an error on a certain line and stuff like that.
Right.
And a bare bones text editor like this will not tell you like that at all.
But you can install packages to add that functionality.
And they're called linters, a code linter.
Yeah, so something like this seems like it could be kind of trivial, but honestly, if you're writing a lot of code frequently, having tools that work well for what you're working on makes a very large difference in the long run.
Especially in JavaScript, where it can be easy to mistype something and it'll be okay. Like it'll accept it without giving you any error, and then you'll wonder why your code's not working. So having warnings that something's not declared or you haven't used it before is very helpful.
Yeah, I actually don't have any of those
No, you don't.
extensions, so if I type
know
something,
the two you should install right now, but
Okay,
it's linter and linter-js.
okay, I can do that later.
We'll do later.
So, do you guys have Atom installed? Okay.
Go ahead and begin, and I guess just go kind of
Yeah, we can catch them up.
Catch up.
Yeah. So so the first thing we do is the manifest version, and then we want to give our application a name. So oh, I didn't even talk about what the extension we're building is going to do. That's kind of important. So I don't know about you, but every time you go to a website, haven't you wondered where they're hosting their server? Probably not, right? But in case you did, that's the extension that we're going to be building. So I don't know. I guess it's kind of interesting. Like, if whenever you go to a website, like, if you go to Google, Google is based in California, so the Chrome is going to tell you this website is in California, and then maybe we can click on the extension and get more details, the name of the company that's running it, where, and then exactly even the city and stuff like that. So that's basically the extension that we're building, and it's kind of simple, maybe not incredibly useful, but it's good to demonstrate. Because in doing that, we're not only building a Chrome extension, we're displaying content, but we're also going to be making an HTTP request to get that information. So I think it should do the job at sort of giving you guys a little bit of stuff to work with.
What's cool about this extension is that you get to see what cloud providers your favorite sites are going. So if you go to Reddit, I know you'll see Amazon.
Yeah, you'll see Amazon Web Services.
You see if they're using, most people are moving towards the cloud, so you'll see what cloud provider they're actually using to deploy their stuff.
Yeah, and it turns out this extension is basically always going to say California, because almost everything is in California. So I just want to give you a warning. If it looks like it's not,
when you run into a Russia.
yeah, if it looks like it's not changing, it's probably just because everything's in California. So we'll call this location extension.
So creative.
Oh yeah, and then we give it a description. So this description is basically so that when you have the extension installed and you're looking on Chrome, it basically says what it does. So I'll say this. Extension will tell you where the domain you're at is hosted. And we have to state a version number. So this is our first time doing this, so version 1.0, I guess. It's kind of arbitrary, but... And if I make a typo at any point, then you guys notice, please let me know, because I tend to do that a lot.
And again, feel free to like raise your hand or stop them if he's going too fast or ask any questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Manifest will be fine.
So I guess I missed what the manifest version at the top was.
I'm sorry?
What was the purpose of the manifest version at the top?
So this manifest version, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that it is basically, it tells the Chrome extension like what format the manifest is going to be in, so it knows how to understand it. And like I showed you here on Google's documentation, they said to use version 2, so I'm using version 2.
Yeah. I guess when Chrome updates, we might change the format.
Yeah, pretty much. So so the next thing that we have to define is it's an attribute called browser action. So those settings, those things that we're going to configure there include what icon is going to show up on the extensions, and also, so when you click the extension, something is going to pop up, right? And the thing that pops up is basically, it's almost like a mini web page. It's just a little HTML file. So we need to specify what file we want to come up when we click on it. So this next section we'll create a browser action. And this is going to be a little object that has the attributes default icon, which you will, so that image that we downloaded earlier, you should just put the name of that there.
Make sure it's in the same folder.
I'm sorry? Yeah, make sure it's in the same directory. You see it's here, so I don't need to do any relative file paths or anything, but and then the next thing that we need to do is default popup. So that's where we're going to specify the file that's going to come up when you click on it. So we'll just name this popup.html.
Yo, could you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? Or?
I mean, you're just a little bit faint even where I am, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
You did default pop.
Default pop, I did. Thank you.
I thought that was.
You thought that was how it's supposed to be? No. All right. Yeah, so when I do something wrong, instead of silently laughing at me, please point it out so we can fix it. Okay, and then the next thing that we need to specify is permissions. So we need to use certain resources in this application. And so without, so when you download the Chrome extension and you want to use it, you have to essentially say, I'm okay with this extension using these resources, because potentially it could use resources that could pose a security threat for you, privacy concerns. So
like what if you give the extension permission to use your webcam?
Yeah, so webcam is something that you could put there, and then now this Chrome extension is running and it can take pictures of you whenever it wants to. So you obviously don't want that. So Chrome makes it so that you have to explicitly state what resources you're using. That way when you download it, you know what resources it has access to. So the resources that we're going to need for this are active tab, which, whoops, oh god. Active tab, which is basically just gives us some information about the current tab that we're on, and then also tabs, which gives us information about all of the tabs, I guess. Okay, so that's all we need for right now for the manifest file. Does anybody have any questions about this up until this point? Yeah.
Do you need a comma at the end of the tabs and the bracket?
No, you don't. So when you in JSON format.
Actually,
No, go ahead. Yeah, in JSON format, it's basically like when you're listing multiple things and something comes after it, you have to put a comma so you know that there's more information coming. But when you come to the end of it, you don't. So it's almost like if you're like initializing an array, like and you would do 1, 2, 3, 4. You wouldn't leave it with a comma like that, right? You would want to put it like that. So it's kind of the same idea.
Gotcha.
And so like if this JSON format looks a little bit funky, it's basically just like a hash map if you've seen or worked with a hash map before, just key value pairs, but you can like literally put anything as your value. So like in the permissions key, he has an array there of strings.
Right.
So there's a open bracket, an active tab, and tabs. So that's just an array of strings.
and objects can be nested. So if you look at browser action, that's actually a nested object with another key.
Yeah, so something I should mention in JavaScript, to create an object, you use those curly brackets, and to create an array, you use hard brackets. So we could honestly like, so this whole thing is basically an object. Well, JSON actually stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So this whole thing is basically just an object. And like any class that you've created, objects have attributes. So to specify that, this manifest version is an attribute of the object, and its value is 2. So just like any, something that's interesting here is that browser action is an attribute of the overall object, but it itself is also an object that has these attributes, stuff like that. Yeah, JavaScript lets you do some interesting things. But okay, so that's all we need for the manifest file. So is everyone okay up to this point? All right, so now here we specified that we're going to use popup.html. So let's go ahead and create that file. All right. So when you create an HTML file, you have to specify the doc type as being HTML, and this is basically just so that I think it's just so the browser knows to expect an HTML file, right? This is one of those things I've always just kind of done and accepted as being something you have to do. Whoa.
That was interesting.
All right, so if you're using Atom, you can just type HTML tab, and it will kind of populate this for you. So
That's pretty cool.
I guess for the people, since not everyone is using this, I'm not going to do that. I'll do it all with you, but that's one of those nice little shortcuts that you could do if you wanted to.
Yeah, like auto-closing stuff. Can I install that?
What is that? Okay, yeah. So we say that. So we specify doc type as HTML, and now we put an HTML tag to say this is the actual HTML. So this isn't a tutorial on HTML, but I will explain briefly what everything is doing. So in any HTML document needs to have a head and a body, and the head is basically just where you would specify the title of the page, any scripts that you need, things like that. So for now, all we're going to do is give this a title, and we're going to say domain location finder. And for the body, for now, so you guys are probably noticing that I'm just typing it once and it's doing it. That's kind of, you type body and then tab, and I think most text editors will probably make the open and close for you. If not, then I'm sorry. Wait, what did you say?
Get a better text editor?
Yeah. All right, so for now, we'll just create a header. So H2 is just a header. It's basically just like big text. So H1 is like the biggest text. H2 is a little bit smaller. H3 is a little bit smaller. So we'll make this, and let's just say hello world, because that's what everyone does when they do an introduction tutorial. And then maybe we'll make another one that says it worked. Yay. Okay. So believe it or not, okay, so does anyone have any questions? Is anyone not up to this point yet? Because we'll wait for you to finish. But believe it or not, at this point, this is all you need to do to have a functioning Chrome extension. It doesn't do much, but it will work. So if you open up Chrome and you type Chrome // extensions.
Or just, go to the menu like everyone does. Oh, you forgot the colon.
Yeah. Chrome // extensions. Wait. There are other ways to get here?
I mean, it's like Chrome restore or bookmarks or whatever. It's just easier that way to do it.
All right, so you should probably have a screen that looks something like this, right? Is anyone not at this page yet?
You gotta get view block, bro.
That's okay. So we're all developers here, so we need to click this little button here that says developer mode, and it should give you these little developer options here. So what we want to do is load an unpacked extension, and basically what that does is it just lets you pick a directory on your local computer that houses what it needs for a Chrome extension. So load unpacked extension, and I'm working on, I think it was Chrome tutorial.
Chrome X tutorial.
Chrome X tutorial, okay. Yeah, there we go. So you go ahead and select that. Could not load manifest.
Oh, is it .json, not .js?
Yeah, it's .json.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, sorry.
That's good.
Yeah, so remember earlier when I said this is JSON? Well, you need to say that it's JSON. Okay.
Nice syntax highlighted there too.
Retry. Okay, there we go. So so you have this Chrome extension here, and if you see the extension just popped up here with the icon, and if you click it, hello world, it worked, yay. So we got our little HTML page that comes up when you click on the extension. Is anybody not at this point or have any questions about how all this just happened?
Could not load icon.
Did you spell it correctly? Or did you download the icon? Okay, yeah. So let me see. So here's the link right here. Go to this link and.
Can you just straight link it? Do you have to download it?
Huh?
You have to download it, or can you just put the link?
No, you have to download it.
I think you have to
It's
download
like
it.
a Google Drive link. And when you go on there, you have to click download again. So,
I can make it bigger if you need me to. Is that better?
and then just put it in the same folder.
Yeah, and just put it in the same folder, and then it should work. All right, so I guess that's something that you could probably do at any point. So I'm just going to move on so everyone doesn't have to wait. But yeah, so we have a Chrome extension right now that is kind of devoid of function, but it proves the point. So so the next thing that we're going to want to do is so we want to add some functionality to this, right? So the way to add functionality to a web page is with JavaScript. So we need to add a script to our Popup HTML that I don't like that is going to add some functionality to it. So and when you add a script, all you really have to do is specify the source for the script. So we're going to call this popup.js, and then go ahead and create a popup.js file.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, it's throwing me an error saying manifest is not valid JSON.
Oh.
Oh yeah, I named it incorrectly. You have to name it manifest.json.
For some reason, it's one that still shows JS.
Oh, you just forgot the comma after two. No big
I know, but it's saying trailing comma's gone away.
Did you retry?
Do you know how to specify the type of the script?
The type?
I think you can do type.
Show me your...
Do you have to do
I
that?
don't like really need to, honestly, I don't think.
What do you mean?
Oh yeah, type of JavaScript.
Oh, you're opening a different one. Oh, yeah, just cut and paste. Yeah, I see what happened.
I don't think it's necessary, honestly. But
Can you go back to the HTML page?
type, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the only thing I added new to the HTML is adding this script right here, and then I created a script popup.js.
So yeah, why don't you open the folder like... You want me to show you how to do that? Let's get you set up. So go to Sublime and do File. I think it's Open
You
Folder.
just put the folder so you
No, I guess just Open. So yeah, so instead of clicking, yeah, just click Open. So don't click on anything because you're in the folder. Yeah. Wait, what? Let me see. Sidebar, show sidebar. What?
All right, so
There you go.
I guess
That's a nice
while
version.
everyone is getting their stuff worked out, I'll just talk a little bit about what we're gonna do.
So yeah, so now you just like right click.
So,
and do stuff.
All right, I'll wait. Actually, it's kind of loud. I feel like two people are listening.
I mean, obviously you have another JSON, so I don't know how it's gonna like
Oh, wait, your name has
Just change
Wow,
that
that's
icon
nice.
within the
Okay, so let's
extensions
just double
menu.
check. I actually like
When
when
you choose the
work around
extension.
that.
I'm sorry?
That way.
How would you change the
this happens,
icon
I
like
can
this
still
one right
read
here?
it.
Oh, within the extension?
Yeah.
It's
That'd be
a,
also
So yeah, you missed the comma. after
probably.
that.
It's probably something that
Yes.
you would specify there. Yeah.
And then.
So inside of that file.
Yeah.
Gotta put a gator on it.
Sorry?
Yeah, there you go.
I'm sorry. What about comments?
Click it, you'll see the HTML.
In
So you've made the direct.
wait, what do you mean?
Great. I know. Yep. Never.
And in that folder, you can put all of the.
Great. Well, if you have any other questions, let me know.
Okay.
Yes.
Did you put that in the HTML or in the?
So it looks like you just open your document.
I think it's like a side.
So you have an
Is it
example
like this?
will work, but you have to.
Because essentially you can just do control.
Just
Control
hit
this.
this.
And it does it for you.
Yeah, I always do that, so that's why I don't.
Yeah. They call it file.
I don't always know exactly what the characters are.
It's like C++.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just create a new folder somewhere.
But it does give me like the highlighting, meaning it's not.
Doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
It doesn't like it.
Like it's the linter, yeah. It's not okay.
I think if you press home here, it'll have.
Oh yeah, it needs to be an array.
Oh.
So permissions,
Yeah, there you go.
instead of
Perfect.
curly brackets, make those like merge brackets.
It doesn't matter what you want. Doesn't matter.
Security use strict, bro.
I don't think that's necessary.
What?
I don't think that's necessary for this tutorial.
So do you not use CSS?
Yeah, we should do an ES6 tutorial.
You should. I honestly don't know any of the new
Well, then
ES6
you
stuff.
should be a member of my ES6 tutorial.
I'd be happy to do that.
Mr. Vice President.
All right. So is everyone okay with moving forward?
Give us like 3 seconds.
Okay.
Okay.
So can you use like CSS to style the
Say again. So you made a folder.
info in the extension?
You made a folder.
Could
right?
you use yeah, you could definitely use CSS. In this tutorial, I don't have any CSS for it, but you it's once you open up that pop-up, it's almost as if it's just like a mini web page on in your browser. So yeah, you'll see we're not actually using CSS selectors, but we will use jQuery to select DOM elements with their ID and stuff. So yeah, you could definitely use CSS for that.
So I think
What's
that's
a
everything.
DOM element? I'm just kidding.
So
Does anyone not know what a DOM element is? All right, so it's a DOM element is just, for lack of a better word, it's a thing in your HTML. So DOM stands for Document Object Model, but really it's just like, you know, you would put a tag, like a header tag, that would be an element in the DOM.
Like H2.
Yeah, like an H2 or, yeah.
It's basically like the whole HTML file is just a tree structure.
Now when you go in Chrome, you
With
should be able to
tags.
load that whole. Hold on, click on .json for me.
Yeah, so like if I were to do something like ID equals something, you could then, based off of that ID, find that and manipulate it. And we're going to do that later on in the tutorial, so we can
So it looks like you're
populate the page with the information that we get from that HTTP request.
Yeah, it looks good. So save that. Make sure to save it first. Okay, you can keep going. Sorry.
Okay, so so basically what we're going to do here is use an API that you give it a domain or an IP address and it tells you where it is. So I'll show you what, you don't have to go to this, I'm just going to show you the API here. So it's pretty simple. All you do is go to this address and you could give it /JSON/ and then the name of a domain and it will tell you where it is. So if we use Reddit as an example, it gives you, again, this is JSON again. So if you've never seen JSON before, if you ever do any web stuff, you're definitely going to see it again. So yeah, we'll give us all this information. So we'll use that later. So what we're going to do now is, in this JavaScript file, we need to essentially make that request. But before we can do that, what we need to do is, since we're going to be manipulating elements that are in the DOM, we have to, in order to use jQuery to get them by their ID, we have to wait until they've been loaded. So everything is going to have to be wrapped in essentially an event listener. So what an event listener does basically is you wait until something happens, and when it does, it will call a function that you tell it to do. So in order to do that, you do document.add event listener. So what this does is, so like I was talking about earlier with the DOM, the document object model, you can do certain things with the document, like manipulate things that are in it. You can add event listeners to it. So what we're doing now is adding an event listener, and this is going to be called DOM content loaded. So what that does is, and then we'll add a function here. So what this is called a callback function, and the reason for that is it's not going to be called. So a lot of times when you in normal like sequential programming, when you put something there, it gets ran as it goes, as it hits it. But what this is going to do is set up this event listener, and when this condition is satisfied, it's going to run the code that's in this function, which is what we want it to do. So that's good. So the next thing that we need to do is we want to get the current tab so we can extract the URL from it. So it's always good to comment your code so you know what you're doing. So remember earlier in the manifest JSON,
Is that better, guys?
we said that we wanted to use this permission called tabs. Well, this is where we're going to need it. So to use Chrome's resources, you would do chrome.tabs. So we want to get the current tab or the selected tab. So the name of that function is getSelected. It's a very clever name. So so the first argument is null, and I'll explain that in a second. And the second argument, okay, so this is actually I think you'd call it a callback function, but basically once it gets a selected tab, it's going to call this function and give it the tab that's selected.
If you've done any node, this makes a lot of sense to you. If you haven't, this is really confusing.
Yeah, if you've never used callbacks before, it looks very weird because if you've only worked with like Java or C++, naming functions, and it's always very like rigid and strict, and you have to specify parameter types and stuff. And this function doesn't even have a name. It's called an anonymous function because you never have a reference to it or something to call it by. You literally just say, when this happens, I want to run the code here, essentially. So I actually don't remember what this first parameter was, so I'm going to look it up. So if you look, I'll just Google chrome.tabs.getSelected.
It's null, I guess.
Yeah, so it is null, but I don't remember why. So
Window ID.
the window ID, yeah. So basically, we don't even really need to worry about the window ID. So we just pass it null because that's not really relevant to what we're doing. Yeah. So see, if you look here, I just clicked on it. And if you see, it defaults to the current window if you don't specify anything. And if you can see, it's actually optional. So we just chose, we could honestly probably not even put null and just put the callback function, but it doesn't hurt. So yeah, so does anyone have any questions about that? Because I know that could be kind of confusing.
You're going to use semicolons, put one at the end.
Thank you. Yeah.
So getSelected gets the current tab. In manifest, you had another one for active tab. What is the difference of
Okay, so yeah, we're gonna use that later on for something else. But yeah, I honestly, like, it seems kind of strange to me too that they have tabs in active tab and they do different things, but yeah, they just are essentially different resources. They have different functionality, and you can just use them however you need to. So so to declare a variable in JavaScript, you don't have to specify the type. You just have to say that it's a variable. So var URL.
What is var?
Var. It's a keyword for. I literally just explained that. So so the as I was showing here, the API that we're using is ip-api.com, and in order to get the information about the IP address that you're using, you use /JSON/ and then the domain. So the domain basically is so here, let me show you a little bit about the structure of a URL, because that's kind of important to know how we're going to extract that information. So here's a little bit about the structure of a URL. So the first part is http://, which is the protocol, which is a big scary word for just saying the method that the data transfer happens with, pretty much. And then the next part is the domain. So if you go to google.com, amazon.com, stuff like that, the www.something.com is the domain. And that's basically the part that we're going to use to figure out where it is. So you could actually, instead of using a domain, have any of you done web programming before where you run a server and you go to localhost? Or you could go to localhost, or you could put in your own IP address. It's essentially boils down to, there are some small differences between it, but it's you could use an IP address in place. So just like with their server, you could give it an IP address, or you could give it a domain, and it will tell you where it's located in essentially the same fashion. And then after that, I'm sure you've seen before .com, like here. So this is an example here. So you see developer.mozilla.org. This is a domain, and then anything that comes after that is actually just a specific path to a file on their server. or not necessarily a file, but a resource, yeah. And there's a little bit more information about that I'm not going to get into about parameters and stuff like that, but for the purposes of this tutorial, this is essentially all the information that we need to know. So I'm just going to manually specify the base of the URL that we're using. So it's ip-api.com/JSON/ and then the part that comes next is the domain, right? So instead of extracting the domain here, I'm going to make a function that does that. So I'll call that function extract domain. And so remember we passed in tab from that Chrome's tabs resources. So we can do tab.url to get the URL of the current tab. So now we have to create that function. So just like when you use var to create a variable, you could use var to create a function as well. So we'll create that extract domain equals function URL. So so we want to create a variable called domain, which is essentially what we're going to return from this function. And for now, just make it an empty string. So what we're going to do now is going to look a little bit weird, but if you can keep in mind, here, I'll write it here because it's kind of going to look strange if you don't, or actually we can use this as an example. So essentially, most of you have probably done something like this in your programming 1 or 2, or you do deal with string splitting. Have any of you done something like that before? Where you look for a character and you split it based off of that. So that's basically what we're going to do. So if you look here, so here I'll just get started and explain what I'm doing as I go along. So it's possible, if you notice, so this URL has https:// right? But if I go to this this address here, you notice it just starts directly with that. You don't actually see a www dot or an http://. So we don't actually know exactly what the URL is going to look like. So we need to account for either one. So we'll put an if statement. So we'll use this function index of : because potentially that's not going to be there. So what index of does is essentially you can put in a part of a string. So you call it on a string, and it takes in a part of a string.
A substring, if you will.
A substring. And what it will give you is an integer index of where it was found in that string. And if it wasn't found in that string, it will return -1. So what we need to find out is this part of the string? So if it's greater than -1, that means that it exists and we found it, right? So we want to set domain equal to url.split. So what split does is it takes in a character, and it takes it from a string and it gives you an array of substrings. Each one gets separated whenever it found one of those slashes. Does that make sense to everyone? So so taking this URL as an example, if we call split with this, what we're going to get basically is an array that looks like this. So the first one is going to be http:/, and then it's going to split it at that first slash. And then the next, since there's another slash, it's going to split it again. So it's actually going to be an empty string is going to show up there. And then after that, we're going to get ip-api.com. It's going to split it at that slash. We're going to get JSON. And then it's going to either end or give an empty string. I'm not 100% sure. You could look at the documentation if you're incredibly curious. But what we want basically is this part, right? So if you look here, this was the the first thing that we got, the second thing that we got, and the third thing that we got. But in programming languages, we start indexing from 0, so this is the 0th, first, second index. So we're going to take the second index there. Okay, so that handles the case that we did have that : / but what if we didn't? So now we need to, so basically, if you saw here, if we didn't have that, this was the first part, right? So really what we need to do is do that splitting and just take the first element. And what that's going to do is essentially chop off anything that came after the domain. So that resource path is going to be removed. So we're left with just the domain. So domain equals url.split / and we'll take the first thing in there. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so we're pretty much done, but I feel like this would be an easy place to introduce a bug because there's a possibility. So those of you that have run things on localhost before, you notice that there's a colon and then a port number, right? Or like 800 or 3000 or something, or 8000, 3000, something like that. So if you look here in that structure, you can see that here too. It's example.com:80, and that's the port. So we don't want the port as part of our domain. So we're going to have to make sure to remove that too. So so at this point, what our domain variable will look like is something like this. So ip-api or it doesn't we're actually not splitting that, so let's just use google.com as an example. So potentially there could be a port on there, and so we need to make sure to remove that. So we can do string splitting again, and in this case we're going to split it with this colon and essentially just take the first element in that array. So splitting this one is going to give you essentially an array that has google.com and then 80. So we just want the first part, so that's going to give us a domain.
Right, and if there is no colon, it'll give you the entire string.
Yes, yeah, that's an important thing to say too. So if you just had google.com and we do that split, so yeah, so that's why we didn't need to have an if statement there, because if we do that, it's going to give us an array with a single element google.com. So either way, we're safe. So I could see if I didn't really understand string splitting very well, putting an if statement there, and it would still work, but it's kind of not entirely necessary. All right, so this should return the domain. So it looks like this function is done. Does anybody have any questions about that? You have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay, so now at this point in this function, we have the URL, which is exciting.
Do you need a semicolon at the end of the return statement?
I do. Well, with JavaScript you kind of don't, but it's you should be consistent, yeah. So the next thing that we're going to need to do, so this URL is actually the full URL that we're going to use to make the HTTP request. So we need a mechanism to make that request with. So let's create that mechanism. So this part may look a little bit confusing, so if you have any questions, please stop me before I get too deep into it. So I'm going to create a function that will make that request for us so that it's both, I guess, reusable, and so this function here doesn't get super cluttered. It's good to separate responsibilities like that. So I'll make another function called HTTP get async, and I'll explain what that's going to do in a second. So we want to pass in URL, and we want to pass in a callback. So essentially what we're going to do is use this URL to make an HTTP request to get data back. And then what we're going to do is give the data to this function. So this function here probably looks similar. So this add event listener probably had something kind of similar to it. So it had a type and then a callback. And essentially, once this is satisfied, it actually just calls this function. So we're going to do the same kind of thing so we can pass in the callback to our own function. Is everyone okay with that? All right, cool.
I'm just curious, how many of you guys have done like node programming? 2, 3? Okay.
How many of you have no idea what an HTTP request is? Okay. Yeah, so basically what an HTTP request is
You do one when you go to a website.
yeah. So anytime you go to a website, you're making what's called a GET request. So you're basically, when you type www.google.com, you're hitting a route on their server, and their server is basically responding by giving you the information that you see on the page,
HTML.
which is HTML. So you can, different servers can give you different types of data. So rather than getting an HTML page by hitting one of their endpoints on their server, what we're going to do is get JSON data. So JSON keeps coming back.
You
And
can actually do it, well, you did it in the browser, so.
yeah. So we're going to use, JavaScript has this,
Yeah, this is weird.
yeah, this is going to look scary, but it has this,
This came from Internet Explorer, so that might explain some stuff.
it's called XML HTTP request. And this object, so here, rather than just telling you to trust me, I'll show you a little bit of the documentation.
And this is like a built-in function, so.
Right, all browsers have this. Not necessarily Node though. That first one is the
Oh yeah, here.
Mozilla.
Yeah, so using XML HTTP requests. So all the stuff that we're doing is not stuff that we just like magically have inherent knowledge of. I just Googled how to make an HTTP request in JavaScript, and it was eventually saw XML HTTP request, and I Googled it. And so basically what you do is you create a new HTTP request handler or request maker. I don't know. You can call it whatever you want.
I mean,
Object. Yeah, that's probably better. So, and what you do is you add some sort of event listener to it. So they added a load event listener. And our event listener is going to be a little bit different, but essentially you add an event listener, and just like the one that we did before, you pass it a callback function that's going to be called whenever that condition is satisfied. And then what you do is with this request handler, there's a function called .open where you first specify the request type, which in this case was get. There's other types, but we're going to be using a get request to essentially get data. It's kind of straightforward. And then you specify the URL that you want to make the request to, and you call send, and that's going to send the request.
right, and that's asynchronous, so that's why we have to add the event listener beforehand, correct?
Yeah, so asynchronous functions is something that's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but once you do, it's kind of like, oh, like it clicks. So yeah, so when you're doing things across a network, things don't happen instantly. So it's not like you can call, in normal sequential programming, we would say send, and then that's going to return something, right? Most functions just return something. Well, this doesn't return, it returns what's called well, actually, this doesn't even return a promise.
I don't think it does.
But basically, things don't work that way when you're communicating over the network. Or I guess they could, but it's bad to have to wait for it to come back, because if you're doing things sequentially, that you're going to call a function and wait for something to come back, and your program is not going to continue running until that comes back.
Right.
So if you have other things that you want to go on at the same time, essentially your whole program is stalled because you're waiting for that HTTP request to come back, which is bad because you don't need to stop everything from happening while you're waiting to get data. So that's why we add this event listener with a callback function, because we make the request, and then whenever, however long it takes for the network to process that request and give us our data back, we can be doing other things while we're waiting for that. And then when the data comes back, this function is called, and we can do the stuff with the data that we want to. So it's a way of allowing our program to continue running while waiting for a request to be handled. So the first thing that we do is set up an event listener. So we're going to use a function called onReadyStateChange. And what this function, oops. Hang on one sec. Okay, yeah, so this is going to basically, here, let me show you onReadyStateChange, because it looks really weird. Yeah, maybe I can. Okay.
That's the using. If you go back, you'll probably see the official documentation. Yeah, it's the second one.
Okay, perfect. Okay, here we go. So on ReadyStateChange, so it tells us that this is an event listener that is called whenever the ReadyState attribute changes. The callback is called from the user interface thread. Okay, you don't need to worry about that. But what we do want to see is that it has an attribute ReadyState, and essentially, if it is 4, that means that it's done, and that's basically what we want. We want to do. So when the request is done being handled, so we don't care if it's just been opened by the thing handling it or headers received, whatever. We want to do something when it's completed, when it's done. So we're going to say if XML http.readystate equals 4, which was done, and XML http.status equals 200. So what status is, well, basically anytime you make an HTTP request, you get a status code back that tells you essentially if everything went according to plan or if there was an error and stuff. And 200 is basically just a status code that the GET request was handled properly and there were no issues.
Yeah, a common one you might know is 404.
That's page not found. 403 is forbidden access. There's tons of them. But 200
is the one you never see because it means everything was okay.
And this should be equals. So yeah, so in this event listener, essentially when this happens, we're done, right? We got our data. So we want to call our callback function. So it's kind of weird to see a function being passed in as a variable, but that's what's happening. So you can essentially just call that by using parentheses, just like you would call any function. But we do need to give it some data. So, whoops. So the data we want to give it is XML HTTP dot response text, and what that's going to do is pass this function whatever the server responded with as text.
Will that automatically parse the JSON?
No, so we're gonna have to do that later.
Why not?
Or we could actually do that here. That would be better, right?
Yeah, it would be better.
Okay. Yeah. So this is actually.
Make it temporary.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. So this is actually just gonna give us text, but we eventually want to work with. So it's gonna give us text in JSON format, but JSON format, like we were talking about earlier, is actually it has like a 1-to-1 correlation with an object in JavaScript. So rather than reading it in as a string, we want to use it as an object since we're doing stuff with our program. So basically, instead of giving it that, we want to give it the object. So JavaScript has a nice function. So data equals JSON.parse. And that's going to look at the text and parse it out and return objects that, rather than just having a string that says like this attribute is this is that, we have an actual object that we can do this dot that, and stuff like that.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the tab open, but you have the tab of an example JSON request.
Yeah, I'll show that before we actually work with the data. So we want to parse the XML HTTP.response text and get essentially an object from that. And we'll give that object to our callback function so that it can work with it in a nice way. All right, so we're done making our callback, but we haven't actually made the request yet. So we need to do that. So, huh? Yeah, so in order to do that, we do XML HTTP.open, just like we saw in the documentation. Specify that it's going to be a GET request. You want to make the request to the URL that was passed into this function. And we want to, okay, so we pass in this parameter true. And what true is basically, this is a flag that tells it whether to do it asynchronously or not. So we do want to do it asynchronously, so we're going to give it true. That way, as we explained earlier, we don't want to have to wait for that to be handled before doing anything else. And then what we do is we send the request. All right, so this function looks good. It looks like it's ready to go. So now in our main stuff that we were doing, we're going to use this function, HTTP get async, and as you saw, it takes in the URL, so we'll give it URL, and then we will give it a function, and the response. Remember, we passed the data into here, so we're going to get that data here now and be able to work with it. That was for Max. Okay, so am I? Where?
Like, there's the open parentheses on it. You get async, and then there's the open model function.
The close parentheses is down here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it looks weird because of the function. There's like a curly bracket and then that and then that. So basically, hopefully your text editor will close things for you, and then hopefully just don't like mess it up and delete it, because it's going to be hard to track back and find where everything goes.
Yeah, it's weird at first, but it's surprising how fast you get used to that bracket parenthesis thing.
Yeah, when I first started programming in JavaScript, it really like threw me off, but
Yeah, it's really
you'll adjust. So the next thing we need to do is get the DOM elements and add the data to them. So we, as I was saying earlier, we're going to use, actually we're not even using jQuery, we're using pure JavaScript. But so we need to add IDs to these so that we can find them. So go back to the HTML file. So I'm going to remove this text because we don't want that text to be there. We want to actually specify what the text is. So I'm going to add an ID here and call it organization. So the data that we wanted to I guess show is the organization name and the address. So we're going to have a large header that's the organization name, and then under that let's put the location. So now that we have these IDs here, we should be able to use the document to get the elements that have those IDs. So organization equals document.get element by ID. It's a very descriptive function, and we will call it organization, and we'll say location document.get element by ID, and that was location. And I know I've been constantly mixing single quotes and double quotes this whole time. I'm sorry, but they in JavaScript it doesn't really matter. They're both allowed. It's not like C++ or Java where like a single quote is a character and double quote is a string. There's really no. I think if you have like, if you use strict, does it matter? I don't think it even matters then, right?
It does not. Generally, you use single quotes unless you want to have like apostrophes, where you'd have to escape them every time. So, then you use double quotes. But it really is a matter of style.
Okay, so now so I want to show you here what the data we're getting back is going to look like. So let's go to wait. Oh no. Okay, so I actually have a Chrome extension installed that makes JSON look nice. If you guys hit this, you probably just get like a blob of text that is not really discernible in any way. So yeah, it's called JSONify, if you're interested. I find it really helpful. But basically, you can see that there's an attribute called org, which is the organization Google, since we looked at google.com. And then we have the attributes city, which is Mountain View, which is a city in California, region, which is California, and then country. So we're going to use the organization and then all of those attributes to essentially concatenate into a string that represents the entire address. So in order to set the contents of an element, you use a function you call inner HTML. So that's going to essentially let you put in a string that will put that as inside of those tags. So you could actually, even if you wanted to, start putting HTML here, and it will be nested in the document object model. But we really just want to put a string because we don't need to be too complex with it. So we're going to put data.org, and then location. We want to do. Oh yeah, sorry. So an address normally follows city, comma, state, comma, country, right? So we'll do data.city plus a comma and a space, data.region plus a comma and a space, plus data.country and a comma. Alright, so that's should work at this point. So if you go back to your, does anybody have any questions?
Can you go back to JS for a second?
Yeah, so when I first started programming, a lot of times I would have wanted to do all of this stuff here, but it makes your code not very readable at all. And it's better to abstract those tasks away from, like here, it's very easy to tell what we're doing. So the URL is this, and then we're extracting the domain from the URL. And then this, I guess, still doesn't really look like incredibly easy to follow, but we're making an async HTTP GET request, right? So if we had all of this code in there, you would literally, looking at that, have no idea what you're doing. So it's definitely good to move those things away. And you'll see later we're going to add a little more functionality, and these will actually be reused. So if we had them here, they wouldn't be able to be reused. You'd have to duplicate it and stuff. Yeah?
Where is data defined?
I think you meant response. Nice.
Yeah, thank you. Alright, is everyone okay at this point? Alright, cool. So we'll go back to this extension tab. If you don't have it up still, you can type chrome://extensions. But what we want to do is reload this extension so that it has the new stuff. So to do that, you see this little reload button? You can click it and it'll reload it. So now, if you click it when we're on this, you're going to get nothing because there's no domain for this. So go somewhere that has a domain. So developer.chrome.com. And if I click this, Google, Mountain View, California, United States. It's working. Is anybody's not working?
Anybody else?